mandatory that in that book there be some blank pages, and that one carry ink in order to write down what one hears. Okay, so he summarized. See, in these last 3 sentences, yet he was talking about abstinence, but in these last 3 sentences, he is transitioning from abstinence to the chapter that is coming that talks about memory and what creates memory. Okay? So what is the relationship between abstinence, being away from corrupt people and not eating in the marketplace and having certain quality and certain personal traits and character? What is the relationship between that and this? What he's saying, and this topic of this notion of having a book with you all the time, and having an ink and so forth. What he's saying is, if you do the aforementioned tips and you apply them, these tips would create a kind of attention and adherence to the path of knowledge. Because again, we're not promoting a culture without knowledge also. We find this, by the way. Sometimes when students join up a college, they would be very happy about joining that university or college or institute. They're very happy that they're accepted. And they would start celebrating the identity of the university and the code of ethics and things of that nature, but they're not studying. You understand? You would find this here in Egypt, in universities like at the AUC and at the GUC, for example. You'd find the student is too happy that they got into that prestigious university that they're not studying. They're carried away. You understand? So you said, if you are actually doing abstinence and you're having a culture, or you're assimilating with a culture of learning and knowledge, you should also do practical things related to knowledge. You understand? And also, these things that you abstain from should free up your working memory as well. You understand? Because if you eat up in the market, that consumes effort, that contaminates food, and it's not resting. You're not enjoying the food. People are shouting and yelling and screaming and bargaining with one another. This is not a place to rest and have a decent meal. So again, when you're away from corrupt people, when you don't eat in the market, when you're away from people that talk a lot, what happens? You're more attentive and you free up your working memory. So that would allow you to focus more and to have attention. And for this reason, he ended the chapter with a notion that is related to attention to knowledge, because in the chapter after, he will talk about memory. And memory is based upon attention. And here he's connecting abstinence or al-wara to biological effects that are related to creating memory. You understand? Which is absolutely brilliant, to be honest. Okay? Okay. So, and this is the last notion that we've mentioned here. Any questions? Hi. Yes?
You said that there are 2 kinds of experts. Real expert and what
Pseudo experts, made up experts, phony.
If I have an expert, he said something, like information or something like that.
Okay.
And I just have a different opinion.
Okay.
I'm not directly saying that you're wrong or something like that. I'm just asking him. I read in that book, who's written by so and so, and said something like that. What's your opinion? He said, strong. What I say is correct. Is it really expert? Shall I believe in his knowledge after that?
Okay. What Abu Mehdi is saying, when you ask a certain supposedly expert in our today's world, or in Egypt, for example, in the Arab world, and you ask them a question, let's say they're posing a certain idea or a certain concept, and you would tell them, look, I have read in a certain book something else. So what do you think? And the response is, what I said is the correct one. Well, again, this particular scenario, I would not use it as an indicator of whether they're an expert or not, because there are different factors. See, you could have said, so you're posing so-and-so, and I have read in a book, or there is a book that mentions so-and-so concept. How can we understand what is posed in that book according to the concept that you're saying? What you're doing, you're opening up for him a passage, a path to say, perhaps we're not really in disagreement, but it's different contexts. Maybe I'm talking about an idea that is very intricate or subtle than the idea that you've been reading about. But when you pose the question in a challenging way, they would stop you. This would be one. Another, maybe the explanation for this question is above and beyond the level of beginners. And the person posing the question is reading books that are not really made for beginners, that are made for experts. And it would take a long time to, explain all the introductions that are required for him to answer that question on the spot. See, I am very much interested, and I wanted to talk to Mustafa at some point about this, because I am thinking of doing something related to the ethics of knowledge. أخلاقيات المعرفة. Understand? Ethics of knowledge. This is something that, unfortunately, we don't have in our society. Either for those who are seeking knowledge or those who are providing knowledge either. Each one, see, a beginner, an intermediate, and an expert in any field, they have rights and they have obligations upon them. You understand? An expert has certain rights. Sometimes we don't give it to them, and sometimes we give them more rights than we should. And at the same time, they have obligations that sometimes they don't meet. In addition, we have a whole category that is really missing in our society, which is how to communicate academic knowledge to the masses. How many science journalists, Egyptian science journalists, do you know? People who write in newspapers. You can, if I ask you, tell me a sports journalist. You can say Hassan Mistakawi, right? Fathi Sanad. Now they're famous in Al-Madiyah. Okay. Yes? If I ask you to, well, the guys would know this more. Okay, but if I ask you to tell me about a writer who talks about politics in newspapers, you can tell me any. Or actually, it's easy for you to look up any as well. Alright? But if I ask you, tell me about a science journalist, no one would know Hamad Yahya, for example. You understand? No one. You get my point. So, we don't communicate academia or science to the people. And that sometimes puts pressure on professors themselves. Why? Because they're asked to communicate things that they were not trained to communicate to the public masses. They did not receive that training. I'm not saying that this is good, I'm not saying this is bad, but this is the reality. They did not receive that kind of training. And in order to talk to the masses, you don't have to be the expert. But at the same time, you have to understand from experts as well. And this is a gap in our society. You understand? You find many books that people cherish, and people find that How We Learn by Benedict Carey. He is a science journalist, and it's one of the resources that I use to read about learning, how to learn. He's a science journalist. So The Big Sword is also written by a science journalist. So what those people do, they have some kind of scientific background, and sometimes they don't have a scientific background, they have a journalism background, but they learn a lot about science and they're very much interested, and they get into interviews, and after 5-6 years they become well aware of the scientific concerns, and they start writing articles summarizing and explaining some of the research findings that people find in labs and at institutes. So they communicate the interests of professors and experts to the public. This is a gap. This is something that we don't have.
So the problem was with my question, the way I asked him.
I don't know.
I tried not to be direct. I tried to be polite with him, not saying you're wrong. I told him, what's your opinion? Just, but the reaction, I didn't feel well with the reaction.
Well, again, I mean, and also you should also distinguish between an expert and a teacher. See, there are different categories.
He alleged that he's an expert.
Well, I don't know. But again, I told you, according to that scenario, there are 3 different cases that we can look at. That he is not an expert and acting like it, or you pose the question in a challengeable way that kind of intimidated him, or you're asking for something above your level, so he wants to, and he doesn't have the charisma to deal with that question in a certain way that doesn't block, the knowledge transmission. I don't know. So that scenario I cannot really judge from that kind of information that you've provided. Okay, other questions? Yes.
2 questions. The last thing you've told about us, the attention of knowledge. Can you elaborate more?
The attention
of knowledge.
Now, what I mean by attention is the ability to focus. Okay. See, chapter 11, what he's talking about is how there are certain habits and traits that we do, and we need to be, and he's talking about abstinence, which is al-wara, and how when you abstain from certain things that even though they're not illegal and they're not sinful, but yet when you abstain from them, it's helpful for you to learn. Okay? Thank you. It's helpful for you in learning. Okay? In the beginning, he began the chapter talking about al-wara and abstaining from these things and developing an etiquette. Okay? And he rounded up in the end talking about how you have, oh, now I understand the question, how you have attention towards your field, being attentive, like always having a book, having a pen with you. This is their practicality, or this is their practical applications of being attentive or having a spirit for learning. Okay? So anyways, coming back. Being abstinent and leaving away those bad habits and those bad traits would free up your working memory. Working memory is like the RAM in a computer. There are 2 different memories in a computer hardware. There's the hard disk, you save files in, and then there's the RAM. Okay? The more you have background applications running, the less you'll be able to open more than one software, or even one big software you cannot open it up, right? And you find the computer freezing and things of that nature, or working in a very slow pace, correct? So what he's connecting a wara, abstinence, with attention. That when you have wara, you don't pay attention to every single detail, you stay away from people who are talkative, you don't eat in the market, you make sure that you rest, at the same time you're not getting near corrupt people, because being near corrupt people, everything in their lives is about hostilities and jealousies and envies and so forth. So you're away from all the things that are stressful and draining your efforts. Alright? He wants to make a transition from this to the idea of memory. So this abstinence frees up your attention, the ability to be attentive, and this is related to the attention restoration theory. the more you free up your working memory, the more you have positive rest, for example, that frees up your working memory, allows you to be more attentive when you come back to do a work or to do effort and learning. You understand? So what he's drawing a connection, and this is chunking that we talked about before. He's drawing a connection between al-wara and memory. And the connection is wara, being not attentive to every single thing that comes across your walking. Not everything that comes in front of me I have to be attentive at. So when I start focusing on myself, that frees up my working memory, at the same time it allows me to learn and allows me to memorize. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Just now you said about these Sufism issues.
Okay.
If those Sufis, they don't have to sit with the corrupt people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If that happened, who will change the corrupt people?
Okay. Well, again, perhaps you understood what I said literally. Well, there is a difference between seeking the corrupt people and always going and being at their doors knocking. There's a difference between that and between when accidental events or, out of chance, a Sufi would meet with a corrupt person and they would start talking with them. But again, see, we're not talking about corrupt people in general. We're not talking about people who are having problems in their personality as laymen. We're talking about decision makers. We're talking about kings. We're talking about, presidents. And this is not saying that Sufis don't talk with people who, people like me commit sins. I'm not talking, this is not my intention. My intention is that they don't seek power. You understand? You can talk to a person who's in power, who's in charge, to, call him to the right path, so to speak, but without flattering them. And in order not to flatter them, you should not be attentive to their requests all the time. You should not be at their doors from your own willing. You understand? People at power, they must feel that you're independent from them. You understand? But if they feel that you're needing them, right? Put yourself in the shoes of a corrupt person. Right? If a corrupt person who has power and decision making feels that the other person in front of them is in need for them, how can I make sure that your intention in giving me advice is not because you're seeking a benefit? You understand? And because of this feeling that they get, they start manipulating the shuyukh. Not all of them, but those who go to them. You understand? But those who have their own independence from the decision makers, when they say something, they say it because they believe it, they have an intention for it, and they're not afraid of anything. You get my point. They're not seeking a benefit. And this is what I meant. They don't go after the decision makers, looking for, benefits and interests and things of that sort. They're usually pushed for that, not something that they're seeking on their own. So again, yes, the Sufis, there are many events where the Sufi scholars, whether in the past or today, they would meet with presidents or with kings or with people in decision making, and they would help ease up certain things. I'm not saying that did not happen or does not happen, but all I meant is they don't seek it. You understand? And there's a famous famous story by Sheikh Ahmed al-Dardir. All right, when he had the Ottoman prince, all right, when he came to his majlis or circle, and Sheikh Ahmed Nadir used to sit, stretching his feet in front of him, stretching his legs in front of him. And when this guy came, this prince came, he did not stand up for him. He was not that welcoming. Acted as if anyone has entered. Like, okay, fine. You're a prince. You're coming to my lecture. All right, it's okay. You understand? So he wanted to lure him and to, get him into this kind of corruption, and offered, through one of his servants, offered him money. And went to him and asking, the prince is asking, do you need money? Do you need anything? So he told him, the person who stretches out his legs does not stretch out his arms. You understand? And I put my feet in front of you. I'm not going to put out my hand to get money from you. But again, the scholars back then, they had endowments, al-qaf. So they had financial independence. Currently, some of the shuyukh, yes, are very honorable, and others become government officials. You understand? Muwazzafin, clerks. You cannot live in Egypt, in today's world, with a salary that is £500 per month. You cannot raise a family with that. So they appear as shuyukh, but in reality, they're masakin. You understand? They're very helpless people. Seriously, they're, if you think about it, they're just trying to financially survive. You understand? So, anyways.
The difference between advice and feedback. I
Okay.
know that feedback thing, a comment you receive after doing a thing, but it can be advice. So what is the difference?
The difference between advice, go again, sorry.
And feedback.
Well, feedback is usually in return to something else, like there is an action or a doing, and that advice is pertaining to something before it. You understand? You're giving feedback, meaning there's something that happened. I'm giving a feedback regarding what happened. Whether I'm a teacher or a fellow student or something like that, or a worker with or a manager with a subordinate or something of that sort. But an advice could be something. An advice could be something out of not necessarily. You could be giving a heads up, like be aware of something coming up, not something that happened before. You understand? So advice is a feedback is a kind of advice, but not every single advice is a feedback. You get it? Yes? Okay.
I have a question about the examples you mentioned about the point that people look for the people who have the same political opinion as you said in Republican and Democracy in America, or the same color, black and white. Is that because we don't have the same political opinion or the same color, we cannot live in the same place?
No, what he's saying that people like to be around others who are similar to them. You understand? So either you move from one place to another to be next to the people that you like. Like, for example, if you travel to America, you might try to find an Egyptian community to live with. You understand? You will not rent a place in the Chinese, community unless there is some kind of, coincidence, or that you're urged to do that because of a work commitment or something. But otherwise, what would you do if you travel to another country? You would seek what? Seek people who are similar. In the same country, people do the same thing. You understand? A person coming from Sohag, trying to work, you understand? They might look for a shop, or a juice shop, for example, to work at, because many people from Sohag open up, juice shops in Cairo. I'm joking. Okay. You understand? My grandpa from Zolek, so I'm not making fun. Okay, so it cannot be, don't worry, I got that covered. You understand? I can mention it, but I don't have to. And you're wearing green as well today. Okay. So anyways, the point is people assimilate in two different ways. Either they find themselves all of a sudden unique, so they try to find somebody who's similar, they're seeking a comfort zone. Or they start changing themselves to adapt and to accommodate the differences around them because they want to assimilate and become part of the group. You understand? So it's not something that you have to, but this is just, it's an explanation of what happens. You understand? And this is why you find in the Muslim tradition they say, as-sahib sahib. The friend pulls. This is a literal translation, but it means that a friend is usually, the Prophet ﷺ has said, al-mar'u ala dini khalili. The person or the individual follows the religiosity of his friend. You understand? And this is why you find in the Muslim tradition books about raising children, they put an obligation on parents on putting their children in communities that would help them. Because and this is something, I know you're very much interested in this topic of raising children. Many of the things that people get raised upon, they're not impossible to change, but they're usually very, very difficult to change. You understand? Because most of the habits, the keystone habits, the core habits of ourselves, we develop them when we're very little. You understand? And even Walter Mischel, who talked about willpower and the Marshmallow test, I mentioned that earlier here. I don't know if you can ask one of your friends about it. He said that after 5 years, after the person reaches 5 years old, becomes 5 years old, it's pretty much determined if that person has self-control or not. And that marker, that age marker, 5 years old, has been used also by Imam Ibn al-Jawzi. He said at the time of 5 years old, if the person appears to be either as a good boy or a good girl, or a bad boy or a bad girl, that doesn't mean that people become hopeless cases. But what they're saying is, for parents to be attentive in the very first 5 years, that many people actually look down onto and think, oh, the very first 5 years is normal, they're kids, they're not aware of anything. You understand? Many of the very first, and you find, for example, you'd find people, while raising their children, they're young, they would allow them to see television. When they're 2 or 3 or 4, seeing television and seeing movies for adults. I'm not saying it's bad movies. I'm just saying movies that are for people who are 13 and above. There should not be exposed to that whatsoever. Here in Egypt, we let people let their children watch musalsalat, episodes of series and stuff like that, when they're 2 and when they're 3. And what happens? They start developing things that really stored in their minds, and even though they do not recall it, but they're stored in their minds. You understand? I don't know why I'm talking about this. This is out of time. I apologize. Okay. Did you guys write attendance? The girls, the boys? Yes? Attendance? Okay. Oh, so it's a collective thing. Very well. Okay, so any questions? Yes, sir.
Self-testing technique, what's it about?
Basically, don't wait for the formal test or the official test to test yourself. But periodically, whenever you're learning something, take a pause, test yourself. Okay? That could be done in a different ways. That could be done in terms of recall, like if you're reading a paragraph, cover the paragraph, ask yourself questions about that paragraph. It can be done in a way where you ask yourself to explain whatever you have just learned to a 10 years old in simple terms. That could be done in a way where you just personally articulate things, like ask yourself questions about where you study. It can be also done in terms of challenges, like you try to recall the terminologies or the terms that you have just learned about. So basically, you're challenging yourself, you're asking yourself questions, or using practices before the test itself. Like, don't wait for the formal test, but periodically test yourself, whether on retention of terms, retention of meanings, making sure that you understand, explaining the information, trying to explain the information in different contexts. This is self-test. Oh, okay, sure. Go ahead. Thank you. Did I answer your question? Okay. Yes. Okay. Anything? Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, but
It's okay.
speak about this point again in
Go ahead.
general. To be in general, not about just reading something or context or being ready for an exam or testing. And something general, self-testing.
Something general like what? Something general in learning, or something general more than learning itself?
Knowledge, so.
Well, same thing. I mean, self-testing is basically you are putting challenges for yourself to make sure that whatever knowledge, whatever field, whatever practice you have reached. It's like, for example, in sports, self-testing would be something like, okay, you have been training or practicing to play a certain musical piece, or to do a certain act in sports, or something, or to do something of that sort. So self-testing would be putting yourself in a situation where, okay, now you have been practicing for about a week. Show me, or show your friends. You understand? It could be for a person who's a public speaker. You can test yourself to give the speech in front of a friend, in front of a family member, before having the first encounter on the stage. Okay? So basically, you put a challenge before the challenge. You understand? Before I get on the stage in front of people, I deliver the speech in front of my friends. Before I have to do this in the game on Sunday, I do it on Friday by myself. Before I play this in front of I do it on my own. Before I take an exam at the university, you get my point. Okay, very well. Before I wait to the day of judgment, I evaluate myself today. There you go. All right, this is self-testing in the words of Umar ibn Khattab. حاسبوا أنفسكم قبل أن تحاسبوا. Right? Self-test, right? Do self-tests before the final test. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Okay.
You can say them all together, you know.
Okay. How can I be fresh and ready to learn all the time?
You can be fresh.
Yes. And make my brain ready all the time.
You can drink sugar cane with mint. I'm sorry, I had to say it. I've been holding up this for so long. I have two friends here who drink sugar cane with mint. All right? Yes, and it's probably mint oil, not fresh mint. Yes, and it was the first time for me too, and probably the last time that I want to be encountered with it. So, I mean, this is in terms of being biologically fresh, as far as nutrition is concerned. That was a joke, I apologize. But what do you mean? You want to be fresh?
Okay.
Okay.
Here in this session right now, it lasts for about 4 hours.
4 hours?
4 hours with the extra hours of asking questions.
It's only 2 hours.
Okay, what's your...
I came at 7:20. And now it's 9:30. So it's 2 hours.
Let's pay for it.
Are you sure you want to be fresh, or is it something else?
Okay.
Because you're losing the sense of time now. Okay, go ahead.
But how can I be fresh all the time? How can I be ready to absorb the information and to be in a good comprehension all the time?
You can't. Yes, you can't be fresh all the time. That's why you have to juggle between attention and rest. If you try to be fresh all the time, this is eventually you find yourself falling down to sleep instead of going to sleep. And that's what you talked about before. You have to restore your attention, and to restore your attention, you need positive rest, and positive rest where you just relax and think about nothing, or you meditate, or you enjoy a scenery, not Facebook, not news, not shopping. This is not resting. This is just using. This is resting in terms of, in comparison to studying, but not in comparison to general effort. You understand? So we perceive shopping to be resting when we are needed to study. You understand? But in reality, you're doing effort. You're comparing prices, you're bargaining, you're paying money, you're doing calculations, you're seeing different brands, you're comparing fabrics, See, you're learning about the clothes that you're trying to buy in shopping. It's just practical. And you're using the senses more. So you might think that it's easier than studying, because studying depends more on the mental and the cognitive abilities rather than the sensory perceptions. So you think, you get deluded that you're resting, but you're not. You understand? So basically, juggle between rest and work, and do work in small increments. We're doing this as 2 hours, not as half an hour or 45 minutes, because you guys don't live around here, and because this is not an institute where you have a class before me and a class after this one. You understand? So we have to cram them in 2 hours in 1 week. Otherwise, I don't mind if we had the facility, the ability to coordinate and to facilitate having this lesson into 3 parts, like 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour, and that's it per week. But we can't. You understand? But when you learn on your own, it's better to do things in small increments. Take a break and then come back. Take a break and then come back. Okay? I have witnessed last week people take 2 minutes away from doing something, and then when they come back, their performance is much better. Just not even resting, but shifting their attention from one thing to another. The person who's doing the interview with me and the course. When they shift away and they come back, when you're trying to understand something and you reach a point of stagnation, when you go away and then try to reattempt what you're trying to do, you seem more fresh, according to. And the lemonade mint thing of Ashraf. That's it. Did I answer your question? Yes. Okay. Well, excuse my humor today. I'm trying to celebrate. Huh?
I'm not sure that
You will try it? Okay. Fine. But don't blame me. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll see you guys inshallah next time. You have one homework and another optional assignment. The one homework is, I want you to write in a paragraph an evaluation of this whole course, whether you liked it or not liked it. A paragraph, a list, something. Okay? Not words, but sentences. It doesn't have to be a paragraph again. It can be bullet points. Okay? Of what you liked, what you disliked, what you preferred. If we were to do it again, the same thing, what would have changed? You can do that in the homework. Okay? So this is a homework. It's basically an evaluation. And you don't have to write your name on it. So it'd be anonymous, so I would not know. So if you say anything about me, I would not know who you are. Okay? This is the optional is, actually there are 2 options. Either you can give suggestions for future courses, workshops, or whatever. Huh? Oh, you guys already did that? Okay. So the other option is, if you like to give a summary of whatever you have learned in here and to present it in front of people. Whether presented up here or presented from your place. Like, for example, let me put that in a much concrete form. If you're given, let's say, 3 minutes, okay, somebody has met you somewhere, and you've been talking, oh, how have you been? I'm great. Well, I've been attending this, class at Al-Madiafa. Oh, what is it all about? It's about learning how to learn. Oh, can you tell me more about it? And you have 2-3 minutes. What would you say? How would you summarize it?
So
The first is an evaluation. The second is, the first is for me.
yeah.
Okay. The second is for you. Yes, sir. You got it?
Yeah.
What is for me is an obligation. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, it's an obligation. Well, again, the other thing is, it would require that you guys do presentation, and if we have the same number, we'll see. Prepare yourself for next time, but maybe if I find a lot of people, having, or willing to do this, we can have remember, we had 2 extra sessions. So we would then finish next time, and then we have a 9th session for all of this logistics, those people who are passed and receive certificates, and we can take pictures and things of that nature. We'll see how it goes next time, inshallah. Okay? Okay, so I'll see you next time, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.